Thank you. But first of all, I've asked for the screen to be turned off. I have a real deep dislike of PowerPoint, and as we've seen today, it does tend to do odd things across the course of the day. It's Friday afternoon, and so I'm going to try and provide, look at that, that's brilliant. You don't actually therefore need to look at me whilst I'm talking. This is a room full of amazing art, and you'd be much better spending your time looking in that direction rather than watching an English man staring at his phone whilst trying to read what he said. The title of this presentation is Win or Learn. The theme of today has been asking the question about why do we fail. I think it's a better question to ask, how do we win? The great basketball player Michael Jordan said, only when you play basketball, you only do two things, you win or you learn. And to me, the way that we get to winning, A, is by learning really well, and B, creating an attitude, an approach, and a structure that enables you to actually succeed. And what I'm going to try and describe to you very quickly in the next half an hour is 18 ideas, which seems like a lot, 18 ideas for how you can win at doing digital in cultural institutions. So, statement one, winning is an entrepreneurial mindset. I came to museums straight from being a corporate CEO. I promise you, and I've heard some people say that museums could be like a startup. Museums are nothing like startups, absolutely nothing like startups, and they never will be. But I think to make digital work in museums, you need to take some of the spirit of entrepreneurialism that makes startup works and bring them inside institutions. What do I mean by that? One, you need strong will. You've got to make things happen that the universe probably doesn't want to make happen. Two, you've got to have a big idea and try and make it real. And three, you've got to have the adaptability that startups have when you get it wrong. And I'll keep coming back to that idea later. Statement two, winning is having an aligned vision. Digital will never succeed in cultural institutions of any kind unless the idea that digital represents aligns to the idea and strategic vision of what the institution represents. Too often in institutions, digital can't succeed because no one can tell you actually what the institution itself is for. But for digital to succeed, you've got to have a vision of what digital's for and align it to the principle of the institution itself. So at the British Museum, when I worked there, I was very lucky that the great director there, Neil McGregor, had a very clear vision of what the British Museum was. It was a museum of and for the world. And he kept saying over and over again for 10 years, and eventually mostly the world listened. And so I could take an idea of digital, which is that here's the thing that we can do that gets digital from being for just our audience here in London to the whole world, and try and make that real. And once you've got that vision, you can sculpt against it. At the National Gallery, in some ways, our vision for digital is less grand than that. It's one of 8 things we've committed to do as part of our 5-year plan. And if I had to make a choice between that grand, global, universal vision of the British Museum and the very specific vision of the National Gallery, I'd go for the second, because it can connect very directly to things that you have to do every day. As Shane said to me last night, it's number 3 of our 8 objectives for the institution. Number 1 is always going to be art, but number 3 is not bad as a place to start. Principle 3, winning is a story that you can tell. For digital to succeed, I think you need to be able to turn it into a narrative, a thing that I can say to sponsors and benefactors, a thing that I can say to you now that describes what I'm trying to do. I think you need to be able to turn things into a narrative, to make that narrative simple so that people get it, because there is a natural risk and a natural tendency with digital and technology to talk gobbledygook. So talk in a language that people don't understand, and you keep talking in a language and people don't understand. So find a way to turn your story into a simple story that you can tell to anybody, and they'll get it. Number 4, digital is not just about cultural and creative change, it's about economic change. Particularly UK institutions in the period since the financial crisis, but I think this is true as far as I can understand for institutions all around the world, have seen their funding and business models change irreparably in the last decade. Those changes are not coming back. I don't think there's ever been a government in the world that once it takes money away, suddenly gets generous 5 years later and thinks, we'll give you more money now, guys, it's fine. Certainly in the UK, in a post-Brexit universe, that's not going to be true. And so part of what digital has to be for me is not just about making the institution creatively and culturally better, but also about making it economically better. And so for me to do digital well, I have to keep asking the question, how can I make this place make more money, be more financially efficient, and change the business model that it runs from? Number 5 is about having a story that starts with real projects. Whilst digital has to, I think, turn into a narrative that you can express to people very simply, it's also got to connect back to some real things that you do. When I first started working with the Humboldt Forum in Berlin 2 years ago, They had an amazing narrative about what digital could be for an institution with incredibly high goals for itself. But when I asked them to break it down into the things they actually needed to make, there was a gap. I couldn't work out, well, what do you want? Do you want a website? Do you want an app? Do you want some stuff? And unless you can make a clear line that goes from the vision you have here to the things that you actually have to go and do here, there's something missing. There's a hole in the middle. Winning is a profit and loss statement, statement 6. All through my professional career, I've had to go and get money from people, from corporate boards when I first started working, to venture capital investors when I ran a startup, and now to museum boards. I don't think any of them are easier or more difficult than each other. They all want something that they can hold on to and say, yes, I can give you money to do this, and here's why. Ultimately, although it may not be the best thing in the world, the thing that they want most is a profit and loss statement. I've seen digital strategies that never get anywhere because no one can produce a piece of paper and a spreadsheet that says, we're going to invest £1 million and we're going to make £1,001 back. And even if you say we need to make £1 million, but you're only going to get none of that back, at least you've documented it in a way that people, and typically boards are full of people who are really about money, can understand. So you have to build from a profit and loss statement to do digital as a strategic exercise. Number 7, winning is program management, not process. When I naively came out of startups into the British Museum, I thought that you could put some of the great processes that digital organisations try to do into museums. I tried Lean, which is an amazing process if you work in a startup for how to create ideas and services. I tried Agile. None of them work very well in museums. There are things that happen in museums that are sometimes hundreds of years old, and to think that you can put a cherry on top of great new processes is false. Some of it you can start to introduce, but process in itself will not solve anything. What actually seems to work is program management as a discipline. A structure that thinks all the time, every day, about deliverables, about budget, about time, about things that are even more boring than policy, that thinks and puts those into a structure that people can respond to, that puts governance process in place, and that makes sure that you're doing the thing that possibly in museums people understand least. The communication, recording, and documentation of what you do is better than anyone else does. And by doing that, you get into the guts of the institution, into the finance teams, into the HR teams, into the bits where often, honestly, most of the hard decisions get made, and they know that you're trying to do something well. So committing to program management as a discipline strikes me as an absolutely critical part of what makes that work. And I say that because I measured how much time of my staff's time was spent doing documentation for the organisation at the British Museum. There I had a staff budget of about £1.3 million a year, and £150,000 of that every year was spent just writing material for the organisation. A huge amount, about 3 people's wages worth of work, just documenting things back to the organisation. Without doing that, nothing would have got agreed and nothing would have got done. Number 8, winning is a roadmap. For any of you who don't know what a roadmap document is, Google it whilst I'm speaking here today. A roadmap is a clear, simple visualization of what a digital program looks like and when it's going to deliver. It makes people intensely happy when you have one, because people can hold in the palm of their hand what you're doing, how you're doing it, and when it's going to happen. And you can chronicle change for people in ways that they get. I didn't know anything about roadmaps when I worked in media. They don't seem to work from them, but digital organizations work with them all the time. And it's a thing that I first took when I was in a startup from somebody already there and said, look, this is a brilliant thing because I can show it to anybody in the world and they get what I'm doing. And so when I've got one now at the National Gallery, I can take it to my trustees and say, look what we're doing and how it's progressing. I can take it to all my stakeholders, and my teams can own it and take it to their stakeholders and get things done using it. So have it as a core part of your tool set in your armory. Number 9 is a hard comment. Winning is about hard skills in digital. There's no easy way of saying this, but many of the people who work in museums do not have the native hard skills it takes to get the digital job done. I came from running a company of 60 people where I had developers, I had user experience designers, I had games designers, I had writers, I had artists who worked for me. They created amazing things because they had amazing, very specific skills in very specific areas. Museum digital teams, and it's not just digital teams, but other teams within museums, tend to work on a generalist model, a model that's been in place in lots of parts of the civil service for 150 years. It's not possible to do digital entirely on a generalist skills model. To do this job well, you need people who can do things like innovation methodologies, which I've been trying to do on those tables today. Things like hard skills in project management. Someone who can write queries in Python, who can write Java, who can do user experience design. And those are all not going to be one person. They're different people with different skills. And you will not be able to make amazing digital things unless you have some access to that. I've had to make lots of hard decisions in the last 4 years about, therefore, what my teams look like. And generally, whenever I've had to make the decision between a generalist and someone with a specific skill, I've gone to the specific skill. And that's one of the hard decisions that makes digital possible. I cannot honestly see a way around it unless you commit very heavily to training and development. Heavy training and development comes with cost and time. So if you need to do digital now, question how you're going to do that. Number 10, I'm forgetting what numbers I'm on. Number 10 is making noise. Digital needs trumpeting loudly to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. One of the things I did as a trick, both at the British Museum and then at the National Gallery, was to get myself on the front of newspapers within 3 months of being there at least once. At the British Museum, about a month after I joined, we announced very publicly to the world that we were going to put the British Museum in Minecraft. That got onto the front page of the BBC News website and in papers around the world. What a wild and amazing thing for a museum to do, to make itself in Minecraft. In reality, all that was one post on Reddit that said, the British Museum wants to make itself in Minecraft. Do you want to help? And in the space of 30 minutes, thousands of people have said, yes, we want to help. We had absolutely no idea what we were going to do, but as a stunt, to make a commitment publicly that we were going to do something, it worked very well. At the National Gallery, we ran an initiative last year called Sunflowers Live, where we brought together museums from around the world that had some of Van Gogh's sunflower paintings, and in the space of one day, each of them did a Facebook Live from in front of the painting, and we created with Facebook a very quick virtual reality exhibition from it. In one evening, 7 million people watched the videos and 7 million people visited the virtual reality exhibition. And again, we got into every newspaper around the world, New York Times, El País, everything you can think of, covered that story. Money spent, not one penny doing it. Time spent, lots of hours of people's time, but worth it. But a neat capsule that got a story around the world that said the National Gallery is doing this and it's going to be meaningful as we do it. So find a way to make a splash and make that splash quickly. And try not to spend any money doing it. Hard balance. Number 11 is doing the basics simply and quickly. I have very high ambitions for what I think digital can achieve for museums. But for the two directors I work for, when I asked them, what do you want? The answer initially is basically the same thing. Better website, ticketing system that works properly. You have to do those basics and do them well. Doing those basics well is hard, because sometimes you're fixing things that have been very broken for a long time. The National Gallery's ticketing system is 20 years old. No system in any organisation should ever get to 20 years old unless you've been constantly evolving it every day. The British Museum, the National Gallery's ticketing system has been constantly breaking every day since we bought it. So that's not a good thing. So it's hard to rip it out, but it's absolutely part of my responsibility to fix that. National Gallery's website is 10 years old. And so critical to a process of change to start changing it as fast as you can. Either you can go out and do a big project, spend some money, get an agency to do it for you, or you can start by changing it yourself. So as soon as we'd hired people with hard skills, a designer and one developer to start working with us, we brought them in and they start the process of change. And they start by changing one page, the home page, and then progressively you start to work through and change more. And I've not spent any money on the website of the National Gallery. 7 million people a year use that website until they've changed 3 sections now. 3 big pieces of work that prove that we can do it. And now that we've proved that we can do it, we need to spend less money to make the big overall change that comes off the back of it. I'm definitely forgetting, what number was I on? 10? 11? 10. 11, okay. Winning is some people hating what you do. We were just having a conversation about people at the European Union who do digital that people automatically hate. People will sometimes hate what you do with digital in museums. This question about legacy and the future of organizations, you are right at the sharp edge of that. Museums are odd places, I would say, as a still newcomer. On one side, you have some very conservative sympathies, both socially and often politically, in the management and trustee level, combined with some very hyper-liberal, very social, and possibly socialist sympathies in staff. Those things mash into each other quite uncomfortably sometimes. This is particularly, I think, the case in the UK and America. But digital bashes up against all those things. If you have to go and make staff changes because your people haven't got the right skills, if you have to start making some substantial investments, you sit in a place that makes people uncomfortable. And you have to be comfortable that some people aren't going to like what you do. It's a difficult story, but when I came from the British Museum to the National Gallery, somebody wrote a letter to the director there and to the trustees that said, this person is dangerous. He's going to mess up your institution. And I took it as a point of pride. It's okay for people to dislike what you do, as long as you believe and actually can deliver on what you do. You might not take 100% of people with you because you're going through substantive change. And change hurts people sometimes, but you've got to do it anyway. I feel sorry for my staff because at the BM we had trolls on Twitter who came through, obviously from the inside of the organisation, said, what are you doing? And said awful things to people who work for me. And that's not okay, but it's part of the culture we live in now. Everyone will complain loudly and as vigorously as possible in public. It's not a reason not to do it. Number 12 or 13. Winning is hearing the audience through data and insight. Of all the things I think people have to do, like 100% have to do if they're going to do digital in museums, finding a way to bring the audience into your work and into the wider organisation is absolutely the key to it. I started this as soon as I got to the British Museum, where I built a data team there. I think I employed the first data scientist in the museum sector at all, and certainly the first permanently employed one, to try and figure out what the audience was doing. What are they doing? Where are they going? What can we learn from them? And we've evolved that now to the National Gallery team, which every day is finding new things out about our audiences, what they do at our exhibitions, what they do in the gallery. And we're starting to see not big changes. Data and insight won't bring big changes, but it'll bring an ongoing sequence of small changes that you can respond to all the time. How you forecast exhibitions, what people look at in exhibitions, what the actual model of how they attend is, how different audiences attend at different times. You'll never start to know subtle things unless you invest time and effort into finding out what your audience is like. And that's a combination of data, different data sources that come to the institution, and different ways of listening to the human voices that are there. And the good news is, museum audiences love being asked questions about their experience and about that, about what they do there. So go and ask them. If we'd have had more time today, I would have sent everyone on the tables I work with out into the museum to ask people about their ideas. Because how do we know if they're good unless we're validating with the public that's out there? Next one. Winning is emergent cultural and creative change. So I started with a strategy at the gallery. Strategy was about 3 ideas. How do we make the visitor experience better for everyone and integrate digital into every part of the customer journey? How do we get new business models using data? And what does immersive media mean? And we're working relentlessly against those 3 objectives. But interestingly, in the last year, new things have started to emerge. They're only partly to do with me. Content is really what the gallery wants to do. And it's been amazing for me to see how our director, our curators and others are suddenly committing to digital ideas they never would have committed to 2 years ago. So next year we'll start staging immersive exhibitions in the gallery for the first time. Next year we start running a digital artist in residence program where just as great artists throughout the last 200 years have responded to our collection in paint, digital artists will respond in their medium to the work that we do. And that's digital as an enabler, that you're culturally enabling other people to make decisions and to do things that they wouldn't have done if that wider digital strategy wasn't already in place. And not just in the content side, but in IT, in marketing, in conservation, we're starting to see now what you'd call in economics spillover effects, where the fact that we're trying to do digital very well in one direction starts to have knock-on effects into other directions and new things start to happen. Here's where we get some of the interesting bits about what winning might mean. So winning is about strategic pivot. There's an idea in the logic of startups that no startup ever delivers the business model it starts with. You start with an idea, you go down the road, and as you go along, you realize that something's different. Something in the market, something in your audience is different from what you wanted it to be, and you have to change quickly. And as a startup, you're doing that all the time because you're always about to run out of money. When I ran a startup, we pivoted our business model 3 times in 2 years completely. Started out making things for the web, then we started making things for iPad, then we started making things for the iPhone, because the market shifted dramatically around us all the time. Completely had to change our technology platforms. And that's the only way you can do it in that environment, because if you don't pivot, you die. Now, museums generally aren't at risk of dying, but digital strategies are always at risk of complete failure by running out of money and by running out of will. So at some point in your digital strategy, you're going to have to change what you do. My feeling from doing it twice is you kind of know about 6 months in what you've got wrong. About 12 months in, you can start to change it, and probably by about 2 years in, the public story of how you're changing it will start to come through. Hopefully, what's happened by then, and it's happened to the National Gallery, is the things you didn't expect have started to happen in a positive way. Things that I couldn't have planned for 2 years ago become part of the story of change, and you can build progressively towards that. But somehow you've got to keep in mind that there's things that are going to happen that are going to be different from what you want, that mean your plans have to change, and you have to be in control of that process. Beyond that, the next idea is about then winning as the horizon line, and it's what it means to you. Because ultimately, what you're responsible for when you do digital is about the principle and the long-term process of change. And that means having a vision of the future, how technology is going to change, how society is going to change, how the economy is going to change, and what it means back to your museum. And so one of the narratives I keep talking to our board about is, what does 5 years' time look like? What does 10 years' time look like? And what's the things that are emerging in the wider museum environment that we could be doing? Take immersive exhibitions as an area. We're seeing this incredible emergence of, Tonya had one of these on her slides earlier, kind of room scale exhibitions of projections, interactive animations, other things that are emerging very fast as a commercial market all the way around the world. As far as I know, only the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, really as a defensive gesture because lots of other people were already doing it before them, has gone into the market and started making commercial touring digital exhibitions that they're sending about Van Gogh around the world. The rest of us will have to follow that, because now there are permanent museums, 2 in the world so far, based entirely on immersive digital content, 1 in Paris, 1 in Tokyo. And the important thing for us who work in public museums is simply, these are private institutions. The private sector is doing this new stuff before we get there. And if the public sector that we work in doesn't respond, it will go away from us altogether. And once the opportunity is gone, we'll never get it back. And this is what I mean about the future. New things are happening so fast that you have to keep an eye on that horizon line and think, what could we be doing? Munch is a great example. Very specific thing that you focus on here. What could you be doing that stops other people from going out and doing that thing that you could do rather than you? How can you act in new markets? And the last point I wanted to make is about really a cultural one, which is that ultimately doing this job is about never stopping and never saying no. I'm not someone who tends to listen to lots of speeches very often, but there's one speech from about a decade ago I remember very well, which is a guy who went from the corporate sector to the digital sector. He used to be chief marketing officer of, I think it was Allianz, and he went to run one of the great old UK startups called lastminute.com. And he said that when he was in the corporate sector, the thing he learnt most was how to say no and look really smart doing it. People would ask him a question, and he'd find some ingenious, strategic way to say, no, you really shouldn't do that. And when he went to the digital sector, he had to completely flip that logic on his head. And what he said he had to do was just say yes to everything. And that's the principle I've tried to take through doing this job in 2 different institutions, is I just say yes to everything all the time. And the moment I start saying no to good ideas is the moment the opportunity goes away. And I do this all the time, and it's a real pain in the neck for people who have to work for me. So 2 weeks ago, we finally agreed a partnership deal with Deloitte about some work that we wanted to do together. It took months of discussion to get to it. And we got to a meeting on Thursday afternoon. They're like, well, can we start on Monday? And you kind of think about it. And you think, well, how are you going to do it? And they needed to be on site for a whole month, different meeting room every day, access to lots of staff, all this kind of stuff. And your brain says, no, you really shouldn't do that. Just wait a couple of weeks. We can book the meeting rooms and get the coffee and all that kind of stuff. But the only way to do it is to say yes and to start doing the work. And once you start doing the work, the ideas and the benefits start to come out. And that's really hard for museum people to deal with, because it's not the culture we've dealt with for 250 years. Neil McGregor, when I worked for him at the British Museum, said to me, the thing about museums is it's always easier not to do something, but it's always better to do something. And that's an idea I hold in my head every day because it's absolutely true, and more true probably in digital than everything else, is that we will never, ever win unless we say yes now and keep saying yes till real change happens. So the thing I'd say to you just to conclude is be polite to people, run as fast as you can, but just find ways to do it because the future is not going to wait. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. I think these 18 bullet points were just what we needed at this time. Let's open up for questions. Are there any? Well, while you're thinking of what you want to ask, I got one. Bullet point 9, we're talking about the hard skills and the very specific skills you need to hire at an institution. Now, it seems to be maybe easier and less painful for organizations just to collaborate with others who are specialists, designers, for instance, influencers and whatnot. Do you see a future for this more collaborative model as well, or do you really insist that, okay, this needs to go in-house all the way?
There's no 100% answer to that, and it ultimately depends what you're doing. Places where collaboration will be best will be about partnership, where the person you're partnership with is actually about content you would never create yourself. Whether that's Google Arts and Culture, who do things you would never actually desire to do in lots of ways yourself. Whether it's working with a YouTuber, you know, lots of us make good YouTube videos. None of us, frankly, will ever make great YouTube videos that get to hundreds of millions of people because we wouldn't say the things that get to 100 millions of people. So finding partners and great content collaborators who reach different audiences, larger audiences, absolutely. But sometimes you've got to make stuff yourself, and that's where the hard skills bit is definitely there. And that's technical, it's data, it's design. I think those are the three core strands.
Stein?
Thank you so much, Chris. That was really inspiring. A lot of questions actually came to mind, but let me take one specific one first. You mentioned that some of the curators were going into the digital world and doing things they would never have imagined they would do 2 years ago. What actually happened in that transition, would you say? How did you inspire them to?
Well, I mean, I think it's partly opening the door in the first place. The fact that we're doing something very broad in digital gives people a platform to think. It gives something for people to refer back to. So when Daniel, the curator who's doing the digital artist in residence piece, started, his idea started slightly more over here. But when he understood what we're trying to do more broadly in digital, the two started to connect together and the ideas start to just align a bit better. I think there's a little bit of unboxing kind of hidden desire in people. That sounds awful, but is that many people have wanted to do some of this stuff for a long time, but haven't had an organizational context in which to do so. And partly it's just trying to build positive relationships with people. You know, I think the best ideas in organizations will come from across the organization, but until you've got some kind of positive environment in which people can just learn to speak, they won't come out. And so it's a little bit, I said, of kind of unlocking something that's already there, and a lot of kind of dialogue and collaboration that helps people to shape new ideas. And then also getting out of the way sometimes. You know, I don't want it to be governed by me and my groups. I want to kind of help, but keep out of the way when it's not about stuff that's actually here. We have any real benefit that we can bring to it.
Any other questions? Yes, Tonya.
Chris, can you talk a little bit about how you've influenced up in terms of organizations and how you've worked with boards and any advice you might give in that area?
I have to put this question into context. Tanya is one of our trustees, so so she can tell me. Talk to people. You know, actually, I mean, both of the organizations I've worked in have brought in specific digital trustees to try and provide some steering and built digital advisory boards and lots of very good and useful things. Those things can only ever be as useful as the human relationship between the person who has to do the job and the people who are advising on the other side. And so building those relationships and just carrying on a human level dialogue is important. for me, with trustees and advisors, there's a risk to kind of, you keep in an ivory tower here and the people on the ground are too far away down here somehow. So you've got to kind of knit those things together. The other part is just, again, come back to my second point, make it a story. Like there's a clear narrative that you're building that you can keep referring back to. So it's not kind of abstract presentations of stuff that you've got no reference to the past. You don't remind people of what the past was, you just kind of keep a narrative moving forward. And so it's really about storytelling. And try and make it fun sometimes. When I did the first presentation of digital at the National Gallery Board, I got people doing demos. I got Hannah, our chair, running an AR demo in the middle of the board meeting. How is a board, mostly composed of people over the age of 60, ever going to feel comfortable talking about digital if they don't use some of the stuff? So try and make it entertaining. There's a bit of showbiz, I guess, built into that.
Chris is really good with boards.
I was wondering, as an advisor to the Humboldt Forum, there was so much commotion and public attention to the whole project. Yeah. And you were talking about making a splash and being in the public and creating a buzz. Was this whole public dynamic around this project, did you consider that a good thing, or was it rather disturbing? Or the productivity?
The Humboldt Forum, I mean, for those who don't know the Humboldt Forum, so the Humboldt Forum is a brilliantly German idea to bring together a museum, a university and a library in one building in what used to be the Prussian State Palace, rebuild part of the palace and put a new building behind it. So it's kind of an icon of German liberal social democratic thought and also absolutely loaded with many, many complicated historical meanings. It's also the first €1 billion publicly funded project in Germany since the Berlin airport, which anyone knows has not been built. So there's a lot of pressure on it. So for them, whatever they do, they end up on the front page of the newspaper pretty much every day. So it makes their culture very hard. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a very hard project to deliver. I think in a way their task is the opposite of what I've just talked about, which is in a way how to keep the noise down. Because the interest in the project is so amazing that whatever happens, you end up with a lot of political, social commentary about it. So I would say try and keep a bit quieter sometimes. But they found that, as again, it's a very hard balance to do. Right. Amazing project, though.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.
It's amazing.